Don't judge a book by its cover is a phrase that warns us about judging things for superficial first impressions. But today we're breaking that rule because this fighting game's title was too interesting not to look into. Welcome to Weird Fighting Games, episode 21, Last Bronx, Tokyo Bangai-chi. In 1993, Sega released Virtua Fighter, the first 3D fighting game. People were shocked by the cutting-edge graphics and realistic fighting animations. It earned Sega a lot of notoriety, but most importantly, a lot of money. Wanting to capitalize on its success, they put 3 fighting games into development: Virtua Fighter 2, Fighting Vipers, and Last Bronx. Developed by Sega AM3 and released in 1996 for the Sega Model 2 arcade board, Last Bronx is a 3D weapon-based fighting game. Contrary to the name, the game does not take place in the famous New York borough. Last Bronx is set in contemporary Japan right after the 90s economic crash. Due to the economic downturn, Japan is plagued by gang warfare. All 8 of the playable characters are gang leaders who are forced into fighting in a tournament set up by the Red Rum organization to decide which gang will reign supreme over Japan. A cool detail is each gang has their own logo. Who knew Japanese street gangs would be on the cutting edge of graphic design? Last Bronx's characters have down-to-earth designs, with Red Eye, the game's final boss, being the only exception. At first, I didn't think much of them, but the more I played, the more they grew on me. According to the game's director, Akinobu Abe, they were aiming for realism and had characters wear clothes that reflected Japanese fashion trends of the time. I guess biker outfits were all the rage back in '96. And hey, why have 2 pant legs when you can have 1.5? And is it just me, or is Yoko here only a torso with shoes? Based on real locations in Japan, the stages are simple. Parking lots, construction sites, rooftops, nothing too extravagant. The first stage takes place in Shibuya near the iconic 109 department store. Normally you can't just use the 109 branding because it's copyrighted despite it being 3 numbers. That's why most games opt to change the numbers. That's not the case here, interestingly enough. But who cares about that? Look, it's Sonic. Cool. One of the stages is an airport, which is a common location in fighting games which never made any sense to me. This should be one of the worst places to have a fight because plane engines are just so loud. You'd go deaf before the start of the second round. Despite not being made by the Virtua Fighter team, a lot of its influence can be felt in Last Bronx's DNA. If you've played any Sega fighting game, Last Bronx will fit like a glove. But if you haven't, it's still pretty straightforward. Last Bronx has a punch, a kick, a block button, and throws. The punch button is more of a formality, because in Last Bronx, that button is used to attack with your character's weapon. Each character has their own signature weapon alongside hand-to-hand techniques. Soul Edge did beat Last Bronx to the punch with the whole 3D weapon fighting a year before in '95. However, Last Bronx is a much more realistic take on the concept and feels vastly different to play. Special moves are performed with a direction and a button, like down-forward punch is a common input for launchers, but more complex inputs like quarter circle forwards and half circles do pop up here and there. The move lists might look intimidating, but once you learn each string, you'll find it's pretty easy to keep everything memorized. My favorite character is Kurosawa. He uses a wooden sword and is the most gangster out of the whole cast. He's also voiced by the legendary Nori Wakamoto, voice of Johnny from Guilty Gear. Zaimoku is a close second for me because he beats people up with wrestling moves and a big cartoon hammer. The combo system is what you'd expect. You launch your opponent in the air, juggle them like a clown, and if you're close enough, go for a down attack. Combos do a ton of damage. It takes no effort to delete half of your opponent's health. Down attacks tack on a fair amount of extra damage, but are really risky to do because if you miss, you're left wide open for some good old-fashioned retaliation. For that reason, it's safer to use the ground down attacks opposed to the jumping ones, but you don't always have that luxury. Stages in Last Bronx vary in size, and you may have also noticed the chest-high walls bordering the arenas. Unfortunately, there aren't any ring-outs in Last Bronx. The wall is used as a means to trap your opponent and extend combos, though there are some specials that can only be used when next to the wall. Not being able to ring out your opponent isn't a problem per se, but man, does it bother me. It feels like you should be able to, considering how high you can launch your opponent, but you just can't. This might be the only Sega fighting game that doesn't have ring outs. Being a game made for the arcades, Last Bronx was created with one goal in mind: get as much money from the player as possible. After the first 3 fights, the AI starts reading all of your inputs and countering with the best option. It's not Mortal Kombat levels of cheating, but it's pretty close. Instead of playing the game by the rules, you have to play by the AIs and exploit it. The easiest way to victory is finding fast, far-reaching moves that launch on counter hit, then just play passively and whiff punish. Never attack first. That's what the AI wants you to do. For an arcade fighter from the 90s, Last Bronx is what you'd expect, although it's missing one thing that every fighting game has, and that's endings. Yup, your reward for overcoming the odds is nothing. Well, one character does have an ending, Yoko. It's revealed that her brother is Red Eye, who was assumed murdered before the events of the game. He then dies in her arms. And that's all the story you're gonna get. Well, hey, this name entry screen looks pretty cool, and it even lets you input AAA as your name. Sometimes games would change that to something else, and I always hated that, because what if your initial was 3 A's? What am I supposed to do? Do A.A? Anyway, that's it for Last Bronx in the arcade, because it did receive a number of home console ports. Before Sega, creators of the Dreamcast, released said console, its predecessor was the Sega Saturn, a console that is often overlooked and I know next to nothing about. But Last Bronx did get a port to the Saturn, so the question is, how does it hold up? This is one of the best console ports of a fighting game I've ever played. The Saturn version of The Last Bronx adds a number of new modes alongside everything featured in the arcade game. The first thing I noticed was that the difficulty has been toned down drastically. If you prefer the challenge of the arcade version, you can bump up the difficulty in the settings, and if that's still too easy for you, there's an additional 2 difficulty modes to unlock if you're a difficulty junkie. In Saturn mode, you still fight the entire roster, but the order of opponents and final boss is different for each character. The final bosses are accompanied by an in-game cutscene and an animated ending. I love the 90s animation on display here. There's just something about old animation that's better than the modern stuff. These interactions and endings do a good job of giving some context to who these characters are, which was sorely missing in the arcade version. Clearing Saturn mode with all 8 characters unlocks Red Eye as a playable character. He's more or less a clone of his sister, but his crazy energy is unmatched. Survival mode is still here from the arcade version, and time attack was added alongside it. The regular game is already timed, so I don't really understand the point of its inclusion here, or at all really. I don't think anyone has ever picked up a fighting game and said, oh boy, time attack mode. Last but not least, there's 2 practice modes. One is your standard training mode, the other is a combo training mode. I was floored when I saw this for the first time. Not only do you have multiple combos for the same launcher, it will demonstrate the combos for you and even teach you advanced techniques like guard canceling strings. It's not perfect, the game only checks for inputs, not hits, so you can pass the trial without landing the full combo, and not all combos work on all characters, but the effort alone is astonishing. I was gonna make a joke that, whoa, this is better than Tekken's tutorial, but this is better than a lot of fighting games, period. Street Fighter 4 and Marvel 3? didn't even have combo replays in the 2010s, and Last Bronx was doing it all the way back in '97 on the Saturn of all things. But wait, there's more. If you had the Japanese version, it came with 2 discs, the arcade disc and the special disc. The arcade disc has everything I mentioned, but the special disc is something I've never seen any fighter do before. This disc is all about teaching the player how to play the game, from basic actions, to your character's entire move list, to combos, to advanced techniques, and it's all fully voiced by the character of your choosing. Why no modern fighting game has attempted this is beyond me. If learning gameplay mechanics isn't your thing, you can learn about the characters straight from the horse's mouth. They'll tell you about themselves, their weapon style, their rival, and their favorite vacation destination. This was the last thing I expected from a console port of a fighting game. It really shows the developers cared about their game, and the effort they put into teaching should be commended. The only real downsides to the Saturn port are the loading times and slightly worse graphics compared to the arcade version. All of the advertisements, which were real ads for Japanese products, were replaced by Saturn logos, and honestly, I prefer it this way. I didn't expect them to add so much to this version of the game. They could have just done a simple port job, wiped their hands clean, and called it a day. But the developers went above and beyond with the Saturn version. I've only played 2 other Saturn games, but I can safely say that this is in my top 3. Last Bronx would be ported 2 more times. The Saturn version would get a PC port, which unfortunately I couldn't get working on my modern system. From what I understand, it's the Saturn version with graphics closer to the arcade version. For Last Bronx's 10th anniversary in 2006, the game would be ported to the PlayStation 2 in Japan. This port lacks any of the Saturn's additional content, aiming to be as arcade perfect as possible, although there are a few things exclusive to this version, like Big Head mode, Home Run mode which increases launch height, and Huge Weapon mode. You can combine these modes together to create some real mayhem. To access these settings, you have to go to the options and hold right on the credits option for an extremely long time. Red Eye is still playable, but you have to input this code on the character select screen. The advertising has been changed again. Removed are the Sega Saturn adverts and even some of the real life ones, including the 109 building number. So I guess Sega didn't feel like paying up this time. The PlayStation 2 port of Last Bronx might not have all of the features the Saturn version does, but it gives you that arcade perfect experience, and the only way to get any closer would be to play on the cabinet itself. And that's all the ports of Last Bronx. Besides the game itself, there were a couple of drama CDs, guides, manga, along with a full-length live-action movie. Last Bronx, the movie, was a straight-to-VHS release, so don't expect any big-name actors to show up in this one. The story is the same as the game, excluding Red Eye. It's obvious the production had a low budget. Most of the film takes place on one set, making it feel more like a play than a movie. At least the costumes and weapons are accurate to the game. Certain game elements do not translate well to film. Zaimoku with his big mallet looks goofy, and I get that this is a video game adaptation, but did we really need to copy the wind poses too? At one point, Joe does a real-life juggle combo, and it looks as ridiculous as you would expect it to. This film's saving grace is its 80-minute runtime, but it's only in Japanese with no subtitles. They don't make many 3D fighting games these days, so if you've been itching to play another one, give Last Bronx a try. I doubt you'll be disappointed. In a way, this game was way ahead of its time with the setting. If people were as obsessed about Japan back then as they are now, this game would have sold gangbusters. It's sad this game has no real legacy. Its characters aren't even featured in Fighter's Megamix, and that game has the Daytona car. At the very least, the developers at Sega AM3 should be proud they made such a good fighting game on their first try. And after Last Bronx, they would go on to create one of the best arcade games of all time, Crazy Taxi. You know, I just realized it's called Last Bronx for no reason. Going into this, I assumed Bronx would have another meaning other than being a place in New York, but no, I guess they just thought it sounded cool. And it does, because it got me to play it. Nonsensical name aside, Last Bronx, Tokyo Bangai-chi is a weird fighting game. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.